You are here at a very, very crucial time with this massive ratcheting up of tension between the United States and Iran, and of course you sit right in the middle of that in that region. Do you feel the escalation, and can it threaten Iraq itself?
We are truly concerned with the escalation, and we are concerned about the ramification for Iraq. Iraq has been going through hell over the past 4 decades. Latest episode of conflict was the devastating war with ISIS. We want to focus on reconstruction, reconciliation, and we want to move on. Yet we are being dragged back into this dynamics of conflict. And I say to all the actors in the region, as well as to the global actors, that Iraq's security, Iraq's stability is important, vital, and it should not be underestimated, the success we have achieved. Defeating ISIS with the support of the United States and the international coalition, with the support of our neighbors, has been a monumental success. It should not be underestimated, and it should be protected, not squandered.
What do you make of President Trump announcing that he stood back from ordering a strike, a retaliatory strike on Iran?
Obviously, we are happy that war has been averted. This part of the world has been going through cycles of conflict for so many years. We don't need another war. And there is no military solution to this problem. There are serious problems afflicting regional order in the Middle East, and this is nothing new. We have reached a new heightened state of, I would say, tension, escalation. At the end of the day, the parties involved need to sit down together and focus on what is important, really combating violent extremism, focusing on regional integration and economic issues. Think about the Middle East and the legions of unemployed youth who are demanding jobs, who are demanding education, who are demanding a fair share of resources of their nations. This is not the way to go forward. This part of the world needs fundamental solutions, not another war.
Well, and you would be in the best place to know that, given the misguided war, it turns out, that happened in Iraq in 2003. But I want to ask you, because if military intervention has been at least postponed for now, the war of words is ramping up between not just the governments, but between the presidents now. President Trump saying things about Iran, and now the latest, President Rouhani, in a rather uncharacteristic outburst, calling the White House mentally retarded for its actions and its announcement of brand new sanctions. How do you analyze that outburst on a televised address? Is Iran feeling the pressure?
No doubt Iran is hurting. I mean, the sanctions are hurting, and these escalations is hurting the entire region, not just Iran, to be fair. Everybody is on the nerves, and this is not a happy situation for any of the actors in the region, to start with. And it's best to de-escalate, it's best to really focus, as I said, on what is important. This is not the way to solve this problem. The way to solve the problem is dialogue, sitting down to a table, and really begin hammering out on the fundamental issues that are afflicting that part of the world.
Let's say the United States has legitimate grievances with Iran. What would your advice have been had you been asked by President Trump and his administration regarding the Iran nuclear deal and pulling out? Because it's obviously that has caused this massive escalation as Iran is being squeezed by the Americans' maximum pressure campaign.
Let me remind the audience of that sanctions have been tried in many, many countries, and we in Iraq have suffered from sanctions in the 1990s, and the devastation that has afflicted Iraqi society has been really enduring, even to date, by the way. So we feel for the people of Iran as they are being subjected to these sanctions. And there is also a fundamental question whether this is the way to bring about a change in behavior, in policy, that is being sought out. The nuclear deal was welcomed by many in the region, was welcomed by the Europeans, was welcomed by the world as a way to go beyond that impasse. There are issues with that nuclear deal. This needs to be negotiated. This needs to be discussed. And the alternative of abrogating the deal could be disastrous for the entire neighborhood as a whole.
Well, let's talk about Iraq. Would you agree that it was the United States war in Iraq that essentially allowed Iran to expand its influence, and it's expanded into your own country, as you know?
I disagree with that, fundamentally. It was Saddam Hussein's policies of ethnic and sectarian discrimination, Saddam Hussein's policies of genocide and repression that destroyed the Iraqi state and allowed all kinds of foreign influences to increase inside Iraq. Iraq-Iran war was a devastating blow to Iraq, was a devastating blow to Iran, and we are still, by the way, dealing with the consequences of that war. Don't underestimate that. Iran and Iraq are neighbors. We have 1,400 kilometers of borders. People speak of Iran's influence inside Iraq, but there is also Iraqi influence inside Iran too as well. Don't forget the fact that Najaf is the center of Shia Islam. And Najaf's influence in Iran is not to be underestimated. These neighbors have lived together. There are social, cultural, economic ties that have bound the two people for centuries, for millennia. So this is not a mathematical equation, as some people try to look for a turning point here. And the weakness of Iraq, destruction of the state in Iraq, came with the policies of Saddam Hussein. 2003 war, many Iraqis welcomed it as a way to move towards liberty, towards a democratic system of government. Undeniably, the transition in Iraq has been very painful, and Iraqi people have not attained what they have aspired to. We still a lot of work to be done, but the problems of Iraq predate 2003.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo recently made an unannounced visit to your country, and there were fears. Apparently he spoke to you all about the potential intelligence that suggested that pro-Iran Shiite militias inside Iraq would attack US troops in the region. What intelligence did you have on that, and what are you telling them about attacks or any action against American interests there?
There is a policy of the Iraqi government endorsed by the main political parties, including the commanders of the Hashd al-Shabi, the People Mobilization Forces. These forces are commanded by the Prime Minister, and the policy is that these American and coalition forces that are present in Iraq are there at the behest of the Iraqi government, at the invitation of the Iraqi government, to help Iraqi forces fight ISIS and enabling us in that war against terror. Any attack on those will be an act against the state of Iraq, and the state of Iraq, the government of Iraq, will be taking them on. To be fair, a couple of incidents have happened recently. All the key players in Iraq, all the political leaders of Iraq, including the commanders of the Hashd al-Shabi, have come out condemning those. There could well be fringe groups who may want to destabilize the situation. The policy of the government, the policy of the political leadership of Iraq is really not to allow that. We do not want to be dragged into this conflict. The international coalition that is there at the invitation of the Iraqi government. They are helping the Iraqi forces fight ISIS, consolidate the victory against ISIS, and any act against them will be an act against the state of Iraq in that sense of the word.
I wonder how long Iraq wants to see American troops stationed there. And I'm going to play this little bit of an interview that President Trump gave to CBS News recently.
We spent a fortune on building this incredible base. We might as well keep it. And one of the reasons I want to keep it is because I want to be looking a little bit at Iran, because Iran is a real problem.
Whoa, that's news. You're keeping troops in Iraq because you want to be able to strike in Iran?
No, because I want to be able to watch Iran. All I want to do is be able to watch.
How do you feel about that?
At the time, we came out clearly in a statement by the government of Iraq. The American troops, the coalition troops in Iraq are there, again, at the invitation of the Iraqi government for the specific exclusive mission of fighting ISIS. We do not want our territory to be a staging post for any hostile action against any of our neighbors, including Iran. And this is definitely not part of the agreement between the Iraqi government and the United States.
How long would you like to see U.S. troops stay there?
Depends on the requirement of the Iraqi government and the assessment of our commanders. I want to say the following. The victory against ISIS has been quite significant, not to be underestimated. 4 years ago, 1/3 of Iraqi territory was under the control of ISIS. But this fight is far from over. We are still engaged, and we need to be careful not to allow ISIS or another manifestation of ISIS coming back. And therefore, the collaboration between Iraq and the international coalition continues in order to make ensure that this is eradicated.
Would you say the rise of ISIS 4 years ago was a direct result of the withdrawal of US troops at that time?
I think it was a combination of factors. Definitely, there were the lack of security arrangements, and I think at the time when the American forces left Iraq, perhaps not enough attention has been given to developing the security mechanisms that can keep control of the situation. But there were other factors, political as well as intervention and interferences by actors who really wanted to destabilize the Iraqi situation. There is a Kurdish proverb saying, never throw a snake into your neighbor's home or yard. Too many actors in this neighborhood have been playing with these terrorism card and violence card. At the end of the day, people might have thought that Iraq would be afflicted with this, but it turned out to be a regional and perhaps even a global threat. Time for us, the neighborhood, the world, to really focus on the real issue at hand, eradicating the threat of violent extremism and not allowing ourselves to be sort of walking into yet another episode of conflict. We've had Al-Qaeda, we have had ISIS. We do not want to deal with the sons of ISIS.
It so happens that also in your neighborhood, a little further down the Persian Gulf, in Bahrain this week, will be the US workshop on the economic part of the administration's peace plan for Israel and the Palestinians. You've seen that the Palestinians have rejected it. They say, you know, you can't bribe us, you can't buy us out, we want our freedom and our independence. Where do you stand as the president of Iraq on this workshop and on the general policy of this administration towards Israel and Palestine?
The government of Iraq supports the rights of the Palestinian people to a state, and we will be supporting the position of the Palestinians. We're not party to this conference in Bahrain, and we will, at the end of the day, do what the Palestinians consider to be right for the cause, and we will be supporting the cause.
One of the main planks of the US policy against Iran is to squeeze their oil exports. They want you, Iraq, to wean yourself away from Iranian energy. You're currently doing it under a waiver program that the US offers some of its allies. Can you wean yourself off Iranian energy? Will you wean yourself? Is it the right policy to squeeze Iran? And for you, economically, does it make sense?
At the end of the day, we live in this neighborhood. There are important economic interests that bind Iraq and Iran together. And this is not a zero-sum game. And the situation that Iraq finds itself is not a consequence of today or the last 6 months of this present government that has been in power. Iraq has been devastated by war, conflict, and its economy has really been crippled. We're working hard at energy self-reliance. There are many initiatives that the government has taken, but to expect Iraq to basically separate itself from Iran with 1,400 kilometers of border and the important social, religious, economic interests that bind Iraq and Iran together is just and not practical. And it's not about Iraq, it's about Turkey, it's about the Gulf. Many of the protagonists in the Gulf have very, very deep economic relations with Iran. Really, what we have gone through over the last decade, if not the last 4 decades, if I were to consider the Iraq-Iran war, the sanctions in the 90s, the war in the Gulf, 2003, the onslaught of terrorism. Iraq, 4 decades of conflict, you know? Imagine a car bomb every day. Over 40 years, this country needs a reprieve. If you were to come to Baghdad today, you will see serious progress. You'll see normalcy. Last time I saw you in Baghdad, we were being swept by car bombs almost every day. It was a devastating situation. Normalcy is returning back to Iraq.
Given that you are loud and clear saying that another war in that region is going to be a disaster, do you see parallels with the US rhetoric, the build-up, the pattern directed at Iran today with what was happening towards Iraq under the George W. Bush administration?
Saddam Hussein was a unique dictator. He committed genocide. He engaged in acts of aggression across the neighborhood. He presented a threat, a direct threat to his people, and we lived through that. My generation lived through that. Iraqis were yearning for a real change. Again, the dynamics of inside Iran, this is a matter for the people of Iran to decide and for them to discern. But for 2003 and Saddam Hussein, I think he was a unique case in history. But the parallel is as follows. It's easy to start a war, but very, very difficult to end a war.
President Barham Saleh, thank you so much indeed for joining me.
Thank you for having me.